Well, good morning. My wife and I and our family live on a small cul-de-sac here in Austin. It's a tight little circle at the end of kind of a narrow street. There's 5 or 6 houses on the cul-de-sac, and we all are friendly. We know each other. We try to be good neighbors. We wave at each other and stay in communication as best we can. But a few weeks ago, rumors started to swirl on our circle that one of our neighbors had rented their house out for the weekend, and that it was going to be the source of parties on Friday night and Saturday night and Sunday night, all 3 nights. And so the text messages started to go back and forth amongst the neighbors. And it started just as a little bit of curiosity. How late would things go? How many people were coming? Where would they park? But then it quickly turned to fear. A little bit of fear of what the traffic would be like. Was it going to be congested? Was it going to cause problems on our little street? And then as we shared stories and it went back and forth, the fear began to turn into upset as people shared stories of blocked driveways and of unhappy interactions with some of the party goers, or of trash on the street and just other inconsiderate behavior. The issue became that once we heard the story of a neighbor's blocked driveway or bad experience, that story quickly became our own. And suddenly we felt like our own driveway had been blocked, and the upset and the frustration just grew and intensified as the stories flew among our little group. It quickly spiraled downward. And I share this because I want to underscore how important our words are and how powerfully they impact how we view ourselves, our situations, and even each other. These parties were nothing more than a minor inconvenience, and they shouldn't have been anything more than that. But because of the way we all shared our stories and talked and kind of worked each other up, it grew into something else. We know also that Jesus was fond of telling stories and parables, and that they most frequently were designed to challenge and even change the way that we see the world, change the way that we see each other. Stories that were meant to radically shape the way that we see God, ourselves, and each other. Stories that would help us to love God with all our heart, with all our understanding, and with all our strength, and most importantly, perhaps love our neighbor as ourself. I had a similar experience recently in a staff meeting here at St. David's. It was a Zoom meeting. There were a number of us on the call, and we started talking about COVID, about the challenges we had faced in this new hybrid world, as we tried to find new ways for us to meet and gather with each other and connect to each other, new ways for us to learn and study together. And we were sharing our frustrations, the problems we'd had, and the problems we'd heard that you all have had, and the conversation again just began to spiral downward. And it began to feel disheartening and discouraging. And it was at this point that a wise staff member stopped us, and they challenged our rhetoric. They began to share stories of what they had seen during the pandemic, how they'd seen us shift our work and our focus and quickly adapt to all of the changes that required. Then others started to share positive stories of newcomers and of longtime parishioners who'd been fed and encouraged and supported by the classes and the worship services that we designed. The shift in tone was quick. And you could feel it, even though we weren't meeting in person, you could feel it across the screens as our stories changed from frustration and negative to positive, and sharing the joy and the good things that had happened. I don't mean to suggest that there isn't a time and a place for sharing our frustrations and for venting, but I think we also have to acknowledge that our emotions, our tone, are contagious, and they can spread. Just like we worry about spreading COVID or our germs and we wear masks to protect ourselves, what if we acknowledge that the stories we tell and we share with each other have power? We can choose to spread fear and upset and anger just as easily as we can spread hope and love and grace. Do our stories invite connection and sharing with each other? Or do they create division and discord? What are the stories you tell about yourself? What are the stories you tell about God, about St. David's, and about your faith? What are the stories you tell about your neighbors and your loved ones? After the experience in the staff meeting the other day and in our neighborhood, I've been trying to be more aware of inviting people to share and to tell their stories. And I've tried to be more proactive about telling and sharing my own. We all have the ability to add to the love and the connection that surrounds us. Just like Moses was saying to mark it on the doorpost and on your hands and on your forehead. What if we were just that much more aware of taking love and grace out into the world and sharing it and spreading it proactively? Our stories can even be vulnerable, like when a friend and parishioner recently reached out for support as they awaited results from a biopsy. Their vulnerability and their risk led to connection and shared prayers and support. And I hope that they knew in that moment that they weren't alone, that they knew that they were loved, and that I was there for them and that this congregation is there for them in this time of their need. Sometimes we have to be willing to share our fear and to ask for help when we need it. Our stories are sometimes painful or anxiety-filled, but when they come from a place of vulnerability, they lead to connection and love and community. I ask too, when we hear talk about our neighbors and the homeless, and we hear people talking about the camps and fear of crime or other issues and things that lead to division and to othering, how do we respond? Do we add to the division and to the negativity? Or perhaps we've talked, as I did this week, I reached out to Arit, and I just asked her to share some stories from the past week from Trinity Center. She told me a story of them helping a neighbor buy a bus ticket home so that he could be the caregiver for his mom who was about to have brain surgery. She described the telephone conversation that she took part in with that neighbor and his mom, and just the joy and the tears and the excitement as she thought about her son coming home to care for her. She told me about a homeless amputee who was recently shown their new apartment, thanks to the care and the love of the social workers at Trinity. You might even have your own experiences and stories of shared meals and shared worship with faithful members of our own community who are homeless. And just think for a moment if this building could talk and tell its stories of almost 200 years of people gathering here. Just in the last week and a half, St. David's has hosted a wedding, a funeral, multiple Sunday services, a film festival, and multiple events designed to celebrate one of our former rectors, the Bethels. Parishioners have banded together to provide needed transportation for those who couldn't drive. Another group gathered this week to hand address and stamp and stuff hundreds of envelopes so that when you all receive them, they'd have a personal touch, and also just to help save some money and some funds for the church. Our sextons and staff and altar guild have worked tirelessly so that we could transform from a film festival to a funeral home to a wedding chapel and now to a worship space, changing sometimes within a matter of hours. This building receives new visitors literally every Sunday, welcoming those who come seeking a new church home and a place to worship. And their stories are varied and powerful, and they deserve to be heard and to be shared. So I ask, do our stories and our narratives invite connection and vulnerability and love? Do they lift us up and draw us closer to each other and to God? And do we have the courage to challenge the division and the fear of the world by creating a counter-narrative of love and grace? As we seek to increase in love of God and love of neighbor, I think we should start simply by believing in the power of our own stories, our own narrative. We've all been remade as God's beloved and united together. And we gather every Sunday to read and hear and retell our creation and our salvation story. And we must let it transform and change us. We have the ability every day, every time we interact with someone, to choose love and grace and vulnerability. And we have the power to drive and share connection and community with each other. But it starts by sharing our own stories of love and by inviting and encouraging others to do the same. We must listen carefully for God's presence in the world around us so that we can be bearers and sharers of the good news. Amen.